you don't give advice, you share your experience. So I always try to root the way I address these subjects and things that I care about from a perspective of personal experience. I don't tell anyone how to live their life, or I don't take other people's inventory about the choices that they're making. If they want to engage me on that and ask for my opinion, I'm happy to give it. But in terms of being an advocate, I'd much rather be a lighthouse, somebody who stands firm in their convictions, who's living their life in an aspirational way, and then attracts the people, into their orbit or their sphere who are interested in knowing more about that. I feel like that's first of all, it suits me better. It's more comfortable. Like, I think we need all kinds of advocates, and you need the hardcore people who are shouting, and you need the protesters and all, but just for me, like that's what feels right to me. And I find it to be just a much more effective way to communicate with people, and a more like empathy.
Team, that is the man himself, Rich Roll. Hey, I'm Dan, and you are listening to the Epic Table Podcast. My friends, I cannot tell you how excited I am for you to listen to today's episode. For a number of reasons, which you'll hear about in a second, but just on a personal note, Rich is someone I've looked up to for a number of years. And I always put Rich as someone as a figurehead behind doing such a good job, and I talk about this on today's show, of helping people be inspired by his way of life without pushing it. And what I mean by that is he turned plant-based, as you will hear in his story, but I've known so many people who say they've just found the adjustment to a plant-based way of life so much more achievable and encouraging through listening to Rich and following him. Now, today's episode isn't just about being plant-based per se. It's actually just about his story. A lot of you probably listen to Rich. If you're following this episode of the podcast, you're probably following Rich's podcast, the Rich Roll podcast itself. And it's really cool to get his perspective on what we see on the outside, as we often do in anything, and just see what the trials and tribulations to growing a business from someone so successful, particularly early on. And he's the first to say he wouldn't be where he is today without his team and his family and his loved ones, which he's so just put at the figurehead of his life. But we also get to dive into a few of his principles, some things that help him make decisions, and ultimately you're going to hear his voice in a way that we always have on his show. And personally, as I said, Rich is someone I've been inspired by for many years, so I'm stoked that you guys have helped make this possible. And I know a lot of you go, well, I didn't do anything, but what I mean is we have built such a community that it is, Rich has become a great friend, and he's obviously keen to come on the show to talk to you guys. So it means a lot that you've either subscribed or have left a review. But if you have not already and still keen to, go to wherever you hit subscribe, or where you listen to your podcast. And of course, leave a review, you just hit that like button, or of course you can type something out. But all in all, it means a lot to me. And guys, I just want to say that strap on in, because Rich is someone that just his voice and presence is unbelievable to be amongst. And it's the first of many. And he was in the studio kitchen, and as you're about to hear, he's always a man to point out some of the less obvious things, as such, like where we were actually during the filming of the process. So, team, I want you to strap on in and listen to one of the most exciting podcasts I've ever recorded to. And welcome Rich Roll to the Epic Table Podcast. My man.
Good to be here, man.
It's great if you have me, man. Been in the studio kitchen for the second time.
I know. First of all, do people realize that we're underground? Does your audience know that we're actually in a bunker? Like a fallout shelter?
You know what New York City's like, man. You can make anything out of anything, really. Like, I think what's really funny is that reaction does happen quite often. But the second one that happens is actually everyone goes, I always wanted to know what was down these things. And you're like, well, right. Just to be clear, this is not a typical situation.
Yeah, all those like underground thing at every retail shop in New York City does not open up into a test kitchen production studio.
Yeah. It could, but yeah, it's new age, man. Man, you've had incredible 10 days being here, and very grateful to spend a couple of times with you on this journey over here on the East Coast, man. And I know you've missed it, haven't you?
I have, yeah. I love New York City. I love travel in general, but New York City has a special place in my heart. I lived here in the late 1980s, early 1990s, and I always loved coming back, and COVID obviously prevented that. So this is my first trip back since then. And I just find that when I come here, I get this mainline injection of vitality and humanity that I've traveled to a lot of places, and it just doesn't happen anywhere else. There's something very unique and special about New York City. And I dig it, man. I've had so much fun.
Dude,
being here.
You've seen your images. Where were you the other day? On top of what were you on?
So there's a new skyscraper that's still under construction. They're completing it this fall. I think the building is called One Vanderbilt, and it's right next to Grand Central Station. So it's a big glass tower. And as part of that project, they're creating this incredible experience, predominantly for tourists, to really elevate the observation deck game. So on the 90s, there's a glass elevator that goes up the side of the building on the outside with a glass floor on it that goes all the way up to the 96th floor. And there's an outdoor observation deck that is glass paneled all the way around. And it's extraordinary. So it's not open to the public yet. And I was able to get like a special sneak preview, like hard hat tour, because it's still like a construction zone up there, but it's unbelievable. And because Manhattan, people think of Manhattan as essentially flat, but there is a hill in the middle of it, and the apex of that hill is right where Grand Central is. So you're on higher ground, and so it's a trip to be up that high, and actually you look down on the Chrysler building, and you're basically on par with the observation deck of the Empire State Building. It's unbelievable. So
man,
check it out.
I think I was telling you the other day, I've got a fear of heights.
I do too.
And I saw your photo, and I actually almost had to go, whoa!
I inched my feet up right to the glass. The good news is the glass elevator was not operational that day, so I'm not sure I can handle that.
That's crazy. Like, some of that stuff that would freak me out. I'm the guy that gets close to the edge and then starts to get wobbly knees and has to kind of like sit down. And I think it's my brothers, Milena as well, would know this. Like, I have to almost like scrape towards the edge.
Oh, it's terrifying. Yeah. And because if you think about it, like if you're actually processing the reality of your situation, you're like literally that high up, and there's a piece of glass like that thick that's separating you from certain death.
Yeah. Well, thankfully that's not the case. You're here right now, and everyone's
I survived.
Happy. You made it.
I survived an elevator ride. Yeah.
Oh, dude. But man, last year we were just chatting earlier about some of the things that come out of last year that everyone challenged themselves with. What was some stuff that typical the audience wouldn't know that you've gone through, or like things that you were really proud of you and your team accomplishing last year?
Yeah, I mean, it's been a really hard year for everybody. Some, have endured much more than others. And I would say, first off, that I've had a very blessed pandemic year. I was able to still run my business and produce the podcast on the regular without, missing any episodes. So I'm super grateful about that. And at the same time, it hasn't been without its challenges. I mean, I think, I'm a parent of 4 kids, four human beings. I have 2 older boys that moved out of the house and were living in Hollywood doing the music thing. Nice. And then when the pandemic hit, they moved home, which was actually really nice to have them back.
Awesome.
But I've got 2 teenagers, and anybody who's a parent of teens knows what that's like. And then parenting through the pandemic probably presented the biggest challenges. It's been really, really hard on young people. But very grateful that I was able to keep doing what I do. And we seized the opportunity to kind of zig when everyone was zagging. So when everybody kind of went to Zoom, we were still able to, in a safe way, get people, in a studio space and conduct live interviews. And at the same time, we placed a huge bet on a new studio space. So we purchased a 2,000 square foot warehouse and kitted it out and used the pandemic year to really build out a studio to kind of elevate the production quality of what we're doing. And it's rad, man. When you come to LA, you're gonna have to come and visit. It's pretty cool.
I'm definitely checking it out. I think one of the coolest things is like we've many people in this community would have already known who Rich and his family and team are, right? And when we saw that, I think I was reached out to him like, dude, who's done your branding? Like, tell me who did your branding. And you were like, my team's done it.
Yeah.
Because you guys took it to a whole new level, and it was always amazing. But yeah, you've like now got this in-house thing that you've accomplished through this tough time, which is, I think everyone resonates with, we all struggled through 2020 and what we come out of. And I always like to address now with everyone, like what's something that you guys have all done. So that's, I can tell you firsthand as people just big fan of like the content, the type of stories are always changing and everything, but the persona of you addressing them in a way that's so relatable, and you ask questions in a way that's always, the way you ask questions, it's like telling people about the energy of New York City. It's very hard to kind of put to, I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, I don't. I'm probably the worst person to try to answer that question because I honestly just try to be present with whoever I'm talking to, and I follow my curiosity. I mean, I do a ton of prep,
of course.
So I go into it like fully armed. But I try to then set that aside and just show up and be available for what happens and kind of let go of my attachment of how it should go or which line of questioning we should pursue. And the more I'm able to do that, the better the conversation tends to be. So I think it's just about being yourself. When people come to me and they're like, I want to start a podcast or I want to do it this way or that way, I'm like, the one thing that you have that no one else has is your personality and who you are. Mm-hmm. And the more you can kind of learn about what that is and express that in that medium, I think the better off you're going to be. And I would say, like, thank you for the comments about the branding and all of that. My name is on the podcast, but I work with an incredible team of people, and so as much as it is about the conversation, I can't do what I do without like surrounding myself with people who are more talented in different disciplines than me, and that's been a learning curve as well, because I started it was just me with a suitcase and mics, and I'd show up at people's houses and bang on their door and do the whole thing myself. So I learned how to do every facet of it. And that's great when you're a control freak like me. Like, I don't know what you're like, but like, I have very high standards that I mostly place on myself. And I'm an introvert, and I kind of like to just close myself off from the world and do my thing and make it perfect. And that benefited me to reach a certain level. But if you want to kind of transcend that glass ceiling, you have to empower other people around you and let go of like kind of the way you would do it or the way you think is best, and just allow other people, create an environment where other people can do their best work. And that's been a hard learning curve for me. I wouldn't say I'm the best manager of people, but that's where I've had the most growth and the most learning throughout the pandemic year.
Yeah, that's been huge, man. Mm-hmm. It's incredible. And to your credit, like, I could not be without likes of Ty and Maddie and now Marie and Milan and stuff like that.
Well, you just crank out an unbelievable amount of content. I mean, I'm on your Instagram, I'm like, this dude is relentless. Like, how is so much content pouring out? Like, do you run your restaurant at all? Like, are you down in the bunker or you're working out?
Yeah. Good.
And you're cranking out recipes. Like, it's unbelievable. And it's super high vibe, and people love it. And it's really, I just want to make sure that I let you know publicly, I've said this to you privately, like, I have so much respect for what you've created and the kind of energy that you put out in the world. And I think it's really impactful to a lot of people.
That means a lot, man. Appreciate it. To tally onto that, as you said earlier, it's people like, we surround ourselves with the right people, and people just buy into it. At the same time, the coolest thing I reckon last year was the team recognised that it was so funny. People, in like Spotify were telling us who their top 5 podcasts were, and it was like DC, Rich Roll, Simon Hill, and all. And I'm like, it was so sick to see that like a few times pop out. I'm like, that's so cool to see. Like, I don't know, that people I admire around me doing the same stuff. And
does that give me honorary Aussie status?
Oh, we've talked about it. Yeah, man, we need it. Like, you have a huge following in Australia. I don't know how. Like, Scott Morrison, Prime Minister, needs to get him on the podcast, and then we'll get him getting a little stamp, passport.
I love Australia.
When are you going back next?
I don't know, maybe January if I can. We'll see what travel looks like.
Go to Byron Bay again? What do you reckon?
I would love to go back to Byron Bay. I could definitely set up shop there.
You could just like this, yeah. And I reckon all the guests would be more than happy to fly to Byron Bay.
Yeah, here's the deal.
As long as you come to Byron Bay. Okay, I'll be there. I'll be there.
Episode frequency would drop off precipitously if I moved to Byron Bay.
Is that because the guests want to be there, or more the fact that you become even more relaxed than you already are?
I think I would like lose interest in the
Just
entrepreneurship trajectory that I'm on. No, but it's remote. Like that's one of the benefits of living in New York City or Los Angeles. At some point, all the people that you would aspire to sit down with are gonna come into town at some point. So I can't imagine living anywhere else other than these two cities.
100%. And so when you I'm going to take people back here with your story because I think there's a number of incredible things I love out of it. I think we talked about this earlier about how you conquered a marathon of marathons as an athlete, plant-based athlete. You overcome some personal hardship with yourself, but then you put out this book, and then following that is where the podcast started. And you went through and just did everything by yourself. And just, what was it, like typical hard yakka? Like you'd knock on people's doors.
What is that? That's some weird Australian. I'm not that Australian.
No. You get this. You get this. Hard yakka effectively means like just hard work, like sweaty and you're down in like the mines kind of yakka.
Yes and no. I mean, I certainly didn't do it alone. I had a lot of help. But yeah, it's been a journey of a lot of weird ups and downs. It hasn't been like a linear trajectory upwards. Like just to kind of recap, if people aren't familiar with my story, I grew up as a swimmer, swam in college, entered drugs and alcohol. That took me on a journey to some pretty dark places. I bottomed out at 31. I got sober, spent 100 days in a treatment facility, emerged from that experience with some tools to reconfigure my life, but maintained this perspective that I needed to kind of get back on top in the traditional sense. Like I had to repair all my relationships, including my relationship with my family, and was very intent on just becoming a productive member of society again. And that translated, in my case, into a pretty solid case of workaholism. I was a lawyer at the time, and I was like, I just want to be a partner in this law firm, mainly so I could prove to, I don't know who, like my dad or the world at large, that this person who I used to be, I could once again become, not because in my heart of hearts, that's what I aspired for myself. So I spent 10 years on that path, during which time I really overlooked my well-being. And even though I'd been this athlete in college, I'd put on 50 pounds and just was a junk food addict and a pretty sedentary kind of couch potato guy, such that by the time I was inching up on my 40th birthday, I just, I was kind of a mess. Like I on the outside looking in, it all looked pretty good. I had a cool job and I was making good money and I'd met my wife and we were building a family. But on the inside, I was really, I was dying. I was having this like existential angst and crisis about what I was doing with my life. And that just happened to coincide with a bit of a health scare one evening where I thought that I was basically on the precipice of having a heart attack. Heart disease runs in my family, and it was scary enough that it really, kind of triggered. It was like a bottom. It was a bottom similar to the bottom that I had with drugs and alcohol, where I realized like I needed to really change how I was living my life, and that kind of set this new trajectory of learning about diet and nutrition, which ultimately led me into this plant-based diet that I've been living on and thriving on for 15 years at this point. And that really restored my vitality, got me interested in fitness again. And, how old are you? You're in your mid-30s, right?
31.
31. Oh, my God. Be your dad. You will find out when you reach 40, like this thing happens where you're like, I need to prove myself. And you have that like midlife crisis thing.
So I'll turn to you when that happens.
And that, a decade from now. that got me interested in being competitive again, and I got intrigued by the ultra distance world, and I felt like I had some unfinished business as an athlete because alcoholism really put a cap on what I was able to achieve as a swimmer in college. And I went into the ultra world and distinguished myself in some crazy races and events that I did. That led to some kind of media interest, like, oh, this guy's a lawyer and he's like doing this crazy stuff, and he doesn't eat any animal products. Like now there's so many plant-based athletes. I don't know if it's mainstream, but it's certainly in the kind of collective consciousness that this is, something that people can do. At the time, it wasn't really the case. And so people were interested in that story. That led to this book that I wrote, Finding Ultra. And in the wake of that book coming out, the question became, well, what's next? Like, what is how do I continue this conversation that I started with the book? And that prompted me to start the podcast, which was almost 9 years ago at this point. And I can tell you, now, like, there's so many podcasts. In 2012, it was not cool to have a podcast. It was most definitely not cool. And it certainly wasn't a way to, like, make a living. Like, are you insane? But I loved it from the first episode that I did, and it allowed me to kind of, I've always looked at it as a means to facilitate personal growth in other areas. Like I got the fitness thing and the plant-based diet thing, like and those were outgrowths of having blind spots that I wasn't aware that I had. So the question has always been like, where else am I? What are my other blind spots? What am I not looking at? Where are the other opportunities to grow? And that's kind of how I've always followed that's sort of the main through line of the show. But yeah, the show, it wasn't like some big overnight thing. Like I did it for years before we ever placed an ad or made any money off it. And it's that period of time, even though my book was well received when it came out, like, the way publishing worked, like I got a really nice advance for a first-time author, but when you've got 4 kids and a mortgage, it's like that shit's gone quick. And I thought the phone would start ringing and all these opportunities would come. And there were many years of real serious, like, financial struggle before everything kind of clicked and came together and, created the kind of situation that I'm in today. It was very, very difficult for a long time.
Man, I think it's we're just saying this, it's so common for people to think all of a sudden it just happens.
I don't know any of those people. I'm sure there are people out there who hit it quick and maybe it's easy for them, but I've never met anybody. And I think that if you want to do something well, anything worth pursuing, anything that you aspire to achieve in your life is hard, man. It's going to be hard. And if you're looking for the shortcut, you're looking in the wrong place. Like, just embrace the journey that you're going to go on and try to make it the best and celebrate the obstacles that come along the way. I mean, you're in one of the most volatile industries there is. Like, if you think, you're not going to meet, a lot of challenges along the way, like, you're in the wrong business, right? Yeah. And so I always try to disabuse people of this idea that, especially in this internet culture of influencers and all that kind of stuff, that you just do this thing and suddenly people are paying you. I can tell you in my own case, it certainly wasn't how any of it played out for me. And to this day, and I'm sure you would agree with this, like, so much more work than people realize. Like, oh, you talk to somebody and you put it on the internet. Like, how hard can that be? I'm like, I guess that's true. Then why am I working like 70 hours a week? Like, I bust my ass, and I literally worked 7 years straight on the podcast without taking a vacation. Like, just because we were in so much financial duress, like I had to make this work. And I think, it's only now that I'm emerging from the PTSD of that experience. Like, I was so buckled down, and now I build in breaks and try to take care of myself in a way that, maybe I wasn't before, because you can't transmit what you haven't got. Like, you've got to walk your talk. How can you be in this wellness space if you're not exercising the kind of self-care that you're constantly talking about? But yeah, man, just embrace the struggle because it will be a struggle no matter what it is that you're pursuing. Like any goal worth pursuing is going to be hard. And the more you can just be comfortable with that discomfort, the better off you're going to be.
Yeah, get comfortable with the uncomfortable, right? It's like, I'm blessed to be doing what I love. Getting up every day as you are, doing what we love. Not working necessarily for anybody, but working with people. And I tell you what, like, people listening in have talked about it themselves, like quitting their jobs and doing something similar. And it's so important that people register, that there is so much work that goes into it. The other side of it is, though, you can't, like, this is happiness. And I feel when I'm doing the things that I'm doing with food, I feel there's a, like, even seeing today with Marie and her bringing out her tart, and like there's a connection there. And like, you know, little things like that to me, just it's like adrenaline, and that's when I know that I'm doing what I love. And I feel the same way with the way that you have always had people on your show in a way, like you champion them in a way that's so genuine. And I think one of the coolest things about talking and walking is, like, you are like one of the first true plant-based athletes. There's plenty of them out there, I'm sure, but one of the first that's really been able to make people believe it is possible to be a plant-based athlete. Not even just possible, but actually that's the way you should be doing it, not in a alienating way if you don't do it. But like, I hear so many people say, oh, Rich, he's the guy that helped me realize it is possible to eat more plants. And like, I don't know, did you come across that when you started to look into that world? That's a big part of your brand. It's a big pillar of who you are. Did you find yourself just like, oh, I'm going to try this because someone told me? Or was it deep research? Because obviously you've done a lot of research based on your legal career. And
it was a little bit of both. I mean, the way it unfolded for me was, I had this health reckoning. I realized I needed to change. I didn't know what that change looked like, but I knew it had to be kind of drastic and severe, as an extreme personality. I needed to go to rehab for lifestyle. Like, I did the drugs and alcohol rehab, and when you get admitted into a treatment center, they literally throw you in a room for like 48 hours because they don't know what you're on. They need to detox you, and you're just kind of, I was left alone, like not told. I was like, is somebody going to tell me what to do?
As an introvert, what was that like for you? You're like, this is cool.
No, it was terrifying.
Gotcha.
I mean, I was like, I am in a mental institution. I thought I was a smart guy. My best thinking landed me in this crazy place. Like, how, all the ideas I had about, like, what I should do with my life has culminated in me being in this place. Like, something is very wrong. So it was scary. But the point being, like, when I had this reckoning with how I was living my life, 10 years later, I needed to recreate that experience for a lifestyle. So I did a week-long vegetable juice cleanse, not because I was, trying to get some health benefit. Like, I just needed to do something that seemed really hard to do, so I would suffer. You know what I mean? I was like, I'd never gone a day without eating food, so let's go a week without eating food.
Yeah, sure.
And sure enough, that left me on the couch sweating, just like I was in that rehab. And that was a great way to kind of reboot the operating system and start fresh. And then that's when this search for, like, at the end of that week-long thing, I felt unbelievable. Like, I don't know if you've done any kind of extended fast or anything like that, but there's a sort of euphoria that starts to, seep into you. And I just had so much energy, and I was like, how is this possible that I feel so unbelievable and I've barely fed my body for a period of a week? Like, I'd never felt anything like that before. And I wanted to feel like that all the time as a good alcoholic. I'm like, this is like a drug. Like, I'm just never going to eat again. My wife's like, I don't think that's such a good idea. So that is what led me into trying to find a way of eating that would allow me to have that feeling of vitality all the time. And I tried a bunch of stuff and spent 6 months, and, it wasn't really working out. In fairness, I was like, I'll try vegetarian, but that means I can eat Domino's pizza. I just don't have the pepperoni on it, like that kind of, like, I didn't know what I was doing. But it was around this time that a guy called Rip Esselstyn popped up on my Facebook feed. And Rip is like 2 years older than me, but we swam at the same time. And he swam at Texas, I swam at Stanford. He went to a high school that my sister went to, and we had been at the same swim meets over the years as kids, and had competed. Our teams had competed against each other in college. So he wasn't like a friend, but I knew him. I knew who he was, and somehow we were. I think we became Facebook friends many years prior to that, or a little bit prior to that. But anyway, on his feed, he was talking about being this plant-based athlete and how he was writing this book called Engine 2.
All right, team. So we just got interrupted by one of my chefs. As Rich said earlier, we truly are in the basement of a restaurant. So Rich, being an absolute legend, knew what point of track he was on. So
I feel like we were interrupted appropriately because I was like going way long on something that didn't need to be that long. The point being that Rip Esselstyn was an All-American swimmer. He then became a pro triathlete. He was the first guy out of the water at Kona. Like, he's a ripper, right?
Wow.
And he had been doing all of this plant-based, unbeknownst to me. And he then, when his professional athlete career ended, became a fireman. And in his firehouse in Austin, it's very competitive. The dudes are always like, seeing who can do the most push-ups and all that kind of stuff. But there were some guys that were really unhealthy because they eat shitty food and all of that. So he basically said, we're going to take everybody's blood markers, and the competition is going to be who can lower their cholesterol the most, because some guys had crazy high cholesterol. So Rip did all the cooking in the firehouse, all whole food plant-based, and he brought these guys' blood markers down to normal or below normal levels, like in no time. And that led to like a New York Times story about what he had done in this firehouse, which led to him writing a book, and him then being this pioneer of not just the whole food plant-based movement, and an example of being an athlete who's killing it in this way, but also leading the charge underneath his dad, who's a legendary Dr. Caldwell Esselstyn, who had been treating heart patients with a whole food plant-based diet for years, and basically reversing heart disease, which is a really radical concept. And they've now grown their brand into this huge thing. But Rip was my first lighthouse, and I reached out to him and I was like, I'm going to try this plant-based thing. And he's like, go for it. And he was like, he gave me the confidence and the encouragement to give it a go. And I did it to like check the box and say, this is for the birds, man. It's too restrictive. But within about 7 to 10 days of making that switch, I felt like I did on that last day of that juice cleanse. I felt unbelievable. And I thought, this is agreeing with me. I didn't expect it to, but there's something going on here, and I'm just going to follow this thread. And that was over 14 years ago at this point.
It's just a constant state of, you said euphoria. It's like this autophagy relationship with your hormones must have been pretty impressive.
Yeah, and it's, I've always tried to be non-dogmatic about it, and made this promise to myself that if suddenly it wasn't agreeing with me, that I would go back or I would revisit this. But I just haven't had that experience. I've really thrived on this diet, and along the way, there have been other people who kind of stepped in and provided mentorship or guidance along the way. Like Brendan Brazier wrote this book, Thrive, and that was another big one for me. So there were other guys, out there who were phenomenal athletes who were advocating for this lifestyle and living their lives in an aspirational way. And they were like my guys and my model. So I felt confident that this was going to work for me, and it has. And in terms of like how I approach it now, when you mentioned, people say, Rich was the guy who, gave me the encouragement. One of the things I've learned as somebody who's been in recovery for a long time and spent a lot of hours in 12-step meetings, one of the tenets of that program is that you don't give advice, you share your experience. So I always try to root the way I address these subjects and things that I care about from a perspective of personal experience. I don't tell anyone how to live their life, or I don't take other people's inventory about the choices that they're making. If they want to engage me on that and ask for my opinion, I'm happy to give it. But in terms of being an advocate, I'd much rather be a lighthouse, somebody who stands firm in their convictions, who's living their life in an aspirational way, and then attracts the people, into their orbit or their sphere who are interested in knowing more about that. I feel like that's first of all, it suits me better. It's more comfortable. Like, I think we need all kinds of advocates, and you need the hardcore people who are shouting, and you need the protesters and all. But just for me, like that's what feels right to me, and I find it to be just a much more effective way to communicate with people, and a more like empathetic way in which to just kind of engage with humanity.
Yeah, you also lead by example. Like none of your stuff is like, this is the way you should do it, as you said. It's like, you just tell people what you do. You know what I mean? That's really cool.
And the instead of trying to recruit people, that doesn't work either. Like, just put out a certain vibration, and the people that like need to hear it they'll find it, and they'll come towards you.
Yeah, it's like, you don't want people coming to you because of something they think. Like, you just want people to believe in what you're doing because it's right for them, and that's a much better connection. I don't know how many people saw you do the epic. Was it Epic Ironman? What was it called?
The Epic 5.
Yeah, the Epic 5. Then you do the Epic 5, which is 5 Ironmans within a week in Hawaii on different islands.
Yeah, so an Ironman a day on each of the 5 islands.
And you do that over 7 days?
Yeah, it was supposed to be 5, but we ran into some. We were like, we had some help, but we were trying to kind of figure it out as we went.
Sure.
And we ran in all kinds of. It's the logistical problem, because you got to finish it by a certain time to make the last flight off the thing, and your gear doesn't make it. Like, all kinds of craziness ensued. So it ended up taking us like 6.5 days to do it. The goal was 5, but we ended up getting it done. It was me and this other guy, Jason Lester, and it was his idea. He invited me, into his harebrained scheme.
Well, I love how you just said it was, there's the control, and like 6.5, and it was meant you fail. It's like, essentially you're saying, we didn't do it. We did it in 5 days instead of 6.5. I'm pretty sure. Sorry, 6.5 instead of 5. I'm pretty sure anyone doing more than 1 in a week is crazy. So kudos to you doing 5, and 5 and would you do 5 in 5 days again?
I mean, it's an interesting thing, because I didn't get back into being competitive as an athlete to like win races or like get accolades. Like, for me, it's always been a spiritual journey of self-discovery. Like, I got into endurance sports because all that time alone allowed me to process all of the confusion and conflicting emotions I was having about how I was living my life professionally, and grappling with this idea of what it is that I wanted to be. Like, my whole life was oriented around this kind of habit trail of like, get into the good school, study hard, get the good job, go to the best graduate school, and then you show up early and you work like ad nauseum, right? And I never stopped for a minute to go to even think, oh, well, is that what I want? And I think when I had that health scare and I started taking control of my health and my lifestyle in a new and different way, I felt empowered, but I also felt an obligation to really address that inner voice in a way that I had historically never done. And that doesn't happen overnight either. But all that quiet time out on trails or riding my bike, allowed, all of those conflicting emotions to percolate and helped me make sense of all of it. And I really think it created the foundation for me, for everything that I do now. So I guess to answer that question, like, I learned what I needed to learn from those experiences, and I don't feel like I did it in 6.5 days. Well, now I can go back and do it in 5 days. Like, I've learned the lessons. Like, it's actually better that it took longer and we had all these obstacles and it was more difficult, because that just created a richer learning experience for myself. So I love ultra endurance sports, and there are certainly things, other adventures that I'd like to, go on with that. But I feel like the core lessons that I needed to learn from that world, I've learned.
And so when you were doing a 3-day journey of was it double Ironman? What was it?
Oh, the Ultraman.
Oh, dude, that looks crazy.
Yeah. I mean, that was the race that I distinguished myself in.
Yeah.
It's basically, so for people that don't know, an Ironman is considered like, the ultimate endurance challenge, right? And in one day you swim 2.4 miles, you ride your bike 112 miles, and then you run a marathon all in one day. Super hard. So this Ultraman race is essentially a double Ironman. It's a little bit more than twice the distance of a typical Ironman, but it's set up as a 3-day stage race. So the first day you swim 6.2 miles, you jump on your bike and you ride your bike 90 miles up to Volcano National Park. This race takes place on the Big Island of Hawaii, and you circumnavigate it over this 3-day period. Stage 1, 6.2 mile swim, 90 mile bike. Day 2 is a 171 mile bike race. And the third day is a 52.4 mile run, so a double marathon. And you end up where you started, running all the way around the Big Island, which is bananas. And it's definitely a hard race. And that was the race that I kind of like made a name for myself in.
Because you, when you did that though, man, like that's a lot of alone time.
Yeah, I mean, I trained my ass off for that. I mean, I was training. It was a job. I mean, I was training upwards of 25 hours a week at times. Because
you'd be doing what? Are you trying to get like in a, equivalent to say a marathon? You do what? 32 kilometers. You get to 21 miles, right? Mm-hmm. So are you doing the equivalent of that every single distance?
I mean, it's, with triathlon, it's this weird puzzle. Like, what do you do every day so that you're making sure that you're excelling in all the disciplines, right? I started off very gradually and built my volume over time, and was one of the things my coach did, because I certainly didn't do this alone. Like, I had an incredible coach, Chris Houth. He built my run volume very gradually, so I would never run 2 days in a row. Most of the endurance base was built on the bike, because you can ride all day with an elevated heart rate and develop that aerobic capacity with your lungs and your heart. But you can't run, you can't go out and run 8 hours. I mean, some people can after years of experience, but building up that base on the bike. So I wouldn't say most of the training, but it was tipped towards being on the bike a lot, and then picking your moments on the run and building your run volume gradually over time. I had the swimming background, so all I needed to do was kind of get back in shape swim-wise and be fit enough that I could complete the swim and be fresh for the bike.
So if you've got someone like myself who's doing the half Ironman and then is going to do a full Ironman next year, would you suggest that to build your aerobic base, you would predominantly set yourself using the bike to do so, and as you said, running, like you wouldn't run every day?
Well, I mean, first of all, it's a very individualized thing.
Sure.
Like, you're a super fit guy, but I think the half Ironman is the hardest puzzle to solve, because it's long enough to be a rigorous endurance event, but it's not so long that you can't be kind of close to your threshold for the entire thing. Like, I think the half Ironman is the most painful of all races.
Because you almost like, it's not sprinting, but it's like, I get you.
It's like swimming the 400 IM.
Yeah.
Or the 200 freestyle. Like, the 200 freestyle is, it's not a sprint, but it's not long enough to really be a distance event. So you're like on the rivet the entire time. Yeah. And for the like the elite triathletes, who can be on that rivet for hours and hours and like for 4 hours straight, like, the half Ironman is a killer. So I think it's a weird combination of endurance, strength, speed. And for you as a chef, the way I would think about it is building that aerobic base is like the foundation of whatever recipe you're making, right? You have to have that first, and that has to be perfect, or else the whole thing falls apart, right? It depends on how much time you have to prepare, because to appropriately build a really robust aerobic base takes a lot of time, and you have to put in a lot of miles at a very low heart rate. But once you have that, then you can toggle up and down on your tempo training and your strength training, and you're all building off. It's a pyramid, you're building off of that. But for you, going into, when is the half Ironman?
Half Ironman in September.
So you don't have that much time. So you have to get your aerobic work in, but you have to pick those moments for some threshold work too. Like, you have to have some power on the bike, right? You can't just spin the rings. Like, you're going to have to be able to like throw down the hammer a little bit.
Yeah, a little bit, man.
But the great thing about having that aerobic base is, and when you have it, is when, let's say we're getting super geeky here.
I love it.
People are into this.
Yeah, 100%. Let's do it.
Like, let's say you have a 4-hour ride, and within that 4-hour bike ride, it's a zone 2 ride, meaning you're going to be below your aerobic threshold, so pretty casual. For you, your heart rate's probably going to be 120 or something like that. When you have that aerobic base, you can then throw some intervals into that or do some tempo work So let's say a hill is coming up, you want to attack the hill, or you have a 5-minute threshold interval in there. You hammer for that, or you just pick up the pace to like crest that hill or whatever. When you have a solid aerobic foundation, your heart rate will come right back down. When you don't have that base, you're huffing and puffing. It takes a long time for your heart rate to settle and get back into that rhythm. So half Ironman is all about being fit enough to dial it up and drop back down into that pace. Heart rate settles. You're comfortable. That's where you want to be. It's not easy. There's like 2 people listening to this podcast that will
I fucking love that. I absolutely love that. I genuinely my listeners love to geek out in these kind of little tips and tricks, but I just love the fact that I personally just got the subjective means of me how I'm going to crush my half Ironman from Rich. That's great. Okay, dude. So this is like you crushing your Ironman situation. You've gone through nutrition profile, something that's kind of obviously just been very perfect for you. That took some time, but you kind of found it. Mm-hmm.
Hold on a second. I got to interrupt you.
Yeah, what we got?
I'm distracted. I have to know where you get your t-shirts. Where do you get the shirts with the big open neck? Do people ask you that all the time?
Yes. Dude, I'll send you some, man. These it's so Aussie, isn't it? It's so Aussie. Like you can see that you try to people wear the same things. Have you seen Simon?
I found myself like watching your stuff, and I'm like, those are cool. Like the big open neck. I gotta get some. Like, where do I get that? I should ask him. I can't be alone, right?
Yeah, you got a few.
That's
things.
your thing, though.
This is 100%.
I don't think I could get away with it.
I think you could. 100%.
This is your thing. Like this is your marker.
Yeah, no, like look, this is, if I'm trying to keep a bit of Sydney in me, it's wearing these tees. Everyone does say that. They're like, why are your scoop necks so low?
I didn't even know there was a name for them. Scoop necks. That's what it's called.
Yeah, 100%. We'll get 10,000 having some athleisure wear. Scoop necks, bro. Mate, no, I'm distracted.
Sorry,
that was great, man. It was great. I like if you're commenting on my ability to style, I'm doing something right. Yeah, man. So you've got all that down pat. So you've got like that part of your life is starting to make shape, and then like I think what was really cool for me is I was hearing your discussion with Laird Hamilton on your podcast, and you said something that was really cool. It's like at the time when you first saw Laird at like I think it was early on in your podcast days. You like obviously knew who Laird was, but it was really cool for you to see the development of your podcast take flight. And now you like have people like Laird come on, right? And he's, Laird Hamilton.
Laird is Laird.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Is there like a point to you, man, that you realize how much power when I say power, I don't want to make it sound like, you're Thanos, but like you realize the impact you have on society. Like, did you realize a point? Because you do have a genuine impact and positive light for people through all these things that you've done.
I mean, it's very kind of you to say that. Like, I really don't spend a lot of time in that kind of headspace. It's not a good place for me to be, as somebody who's worked hard to, maintain emotional sobriety. Like, I know that like the ego is truly the enemy. And it's like, I can't, if I start to think like that, I think I will really lose my way quickly. Sure. So I always try to stay really grounded, and just focus on the work, man. Like, what's the next podcast? Like people are, remember when you said that thing to that? I was like, no, I don't remember. Like, I did the thing, I move on, and I'm just like, what's next? And I try to control the controllables. Yeah. And the only thing I can, in a conversation, you can't even control that much. Like, I prepare, I try to be fit so that I can, express myself to the best of my abilities, and then I release it to the world. And in truth, like, I live out in a pretty remote area outside of Los Angeles, and I've got my guys at the studio, and I show up and I do the thing, and I'm like, yeah, I see the numbers, and I'm like, wow, I guess a lot of people are listening to that, but like, I'm not connected to that. It's only when I travel, and I'm in an airport, I'm walking down the street here in New York, and somebody's like, oh, I'm listening to the show right now, or something, and that's like cool. It's so gratifying, and everyone's always so nice, and it is meaningful to me, like the idea that this work that I put my soul into and my heart into is impacting other people in a positive way. Like, what more could you want from life? So I'm proud of that, and I'm grateful, like you said at the outset, like I'm so grateful to be able to wake up and do what I do today. But I can't get caught up in thinking in that way. And in truth, like if I'm being really honest, like I'm competitive, man. So I see, well, so-and-so got that person, and like, you know, like, why are they, and like, how come I don't, you know, like that's another like, you know, not such a good headspace that I can get in. So I have to work really hard to like not worry about what anyone else is doing and just focus on, you know, following my curiosity and just doing the best job that I can. And I'm not looking to like, you know, oh, this needs to grow and turn into anything bigger than it already is. Like, I'm so grateful for the people that tune in now. It's like, I'm asking a lot of the audience. Like, I'm putting out 2+ hour podcasts, 6 a month. Like, you're asking somebody to give you that much of their time. You know, that's a lot. And to the extent that there are so many people who are doing that right now, like my job is to make sure that those people are valued, you know, for that attention. And if more people want to come on, that's great. But it's not about growth. It's about really honoring the people who are already devoting, you know, that energy to this thing that you do.
100%. That's huge, man. Like, again, that's probably another thing of why you do so well. It's like you're not here to. I know what you mean. Like, the competitive landscape in anything is part of, I think, as entrepreneurs.
They say comparison is the thief of joy,
There
which is
you go.
easy to say and very, very hard to like embody and live. As a, you know, as an athlete, as somebody who's inherently, you know, competitive.
That's
Because
how we
part of that
drive, right?
competitive drive is what gets you up in the morning and gets you excited and motivates you to actually show up and do the thing. So you can't, it's hard to separate the good part of the competitive disposition from the negative part that gets you all wrapped up in ego and comparison.
And do you find, you said like you have to check yourself sometimes. Is that something that you've learned to, you know, kind of subside as you've gotten older? You've been able to like go, okay, I know how to check that.
It's a practice, you know, and it's a practice that I've learned in sobriety, that when I'm, you know, spiritually fit, I have enough self-awareness to know when my character defects are flaring up. But over many years, I've developed the habit of, you know, basically not only running decisions by guys that I trust before I make those decisions, but inviting, you know, basically, you know, all different kinds of people into my life to provide me feedback on how I'm behaving as a dad, as a professional, as an athlete. And I have people in my life who call me out of my shit and say, yeah, you think you're, you know, this, but like, here's how you're coming across. Like, I need that in my life. I need to be right-sized because I have even though I haven't drank or used drugs in a very long time, I still have alcoholism, and that alcoholism will manifest itself in, you know, kind of emotional ways that will take my life off track. And I need those people in my life to hold me accountable and, you know, keep me, you know, on a truer path. And that's something that, you know, it's a lot of work. Like, it's not, you said, oh, do you just over time you just become like, no, it's like, it's a practice, you know, and if I'm not practicing it, I will lapse into, you know, being an asshole or saying the wrong thing or, you know, grinding on a resentment or comparing myself against others or acting out in any number of ways that are unproductive and unhealthy.
Yeah.
I'm not immune from that. You know, it's like, you know, I'm sure people say this to you, like after having conversations with all these people, like, how has it changed your life? It's like, it's not a binary thing. It kind of goes into the soup. And I guess overall it's made me better, but I still, you know, behave like an idiot probably most of the time.
Yeah. Again, my lovely partner is going to be just smiling hearing this because everyone thinks that, like, you know, personally, I can totally agree with you. Because at home, you kind of like, when I get home, I relax. Like, I really relax. I don't think, like, around here, I'm a very fun, I hope, kind of person to be around. I say that.
They'll be the judge of that.
Yeah, exactly. But no, I think that's like, it's not, you're not a true person when you're a home personality, but like, I like to relax and do those things and be a goofball and all those kind of things in general. But I hear what you're saying in the sense that you don't become somebody through what other people have been able to share their wisdom with. It's just like you take it on and go, that's pretty cool to think about and use in your own kind of way. And that's something I personally, like, I think you said this before, it's like having a podcast is like an MBA.
Mm-hmm.
And so you get to then use that insight to make your own informed decisions.
Sure.
Which has been absolutely ridiculously amazing. I think that's one of the blessed things of having this thing is like I get to meet the most interesting people.
Yeah. It's the greatest scam.
Yeah.
You get to like call people up and force them to come to you and sit down and hold them hostage and ask them all these questions under this, you put up a couple cameras and a microphone and like people will actually come.
How long's that table? How long's that table exactly? It's like, it's a good long size table.
The table at our studio?
Yeah.
I mean, it's the table I've always had, but we just moved it long ways for COVID.
Yeah. That's good.
So that we could just be a little bit, socially distanced. But now I kind of, visually, I like it.
It's great.
Although, I feel like we should turn it around again, but I don't know.
It looks like it's direct conversation.
Yeah.
Like on image base, it's amazing. So Rich, man, you're back home tomorrow, where we'll have to do another podcast talking about some other specifics at some point back in your hometown. But what do you obviously the most exciting thing is your family. What can we see coming up on the horizon that your team are working endlessly hard at?
Well, we're finishing up volume 2 of Voicing Change. So last year we came out with this book. That was the other thing we did during the pandemic year. We put together basically a coffee table book version of the podcast, highlighting 50 of my favorite guests over the years, with some essays that were contributed by some of the guests. And I write, introductions to each of them, and we excerpt portions of those conversations to create an experience for either the fan to revisit conversations they love, or for somebody who's completely unfamiliar with what I do to get a taste of the kind of work that we do. So volume 2, we're almost done with. I'm excited about. That should be coming out around Thanksgiving time. So we have that happening, which is exciting. And speaking engagements are firing up, and we're looking at putting together a podcast tour, but that won't be for like another year. So I don't have like big exciting announcements other than just gonna go back home and keep doing the thing.
Dude, Rich Roll's gonna be Rich Roll, and he's gonna continue to crush life and be a voice for us all, man. Dude, I'm pumped. I can't believe I've got you in this studio. This is so awesome.
It's great, man. I was trying to remember how we first met.
How did we first meet?
I can't remember. It might have been Simon shared something of yours, or we had some DMs, and I don't know. I was checking out your Instagram, and I was like, oh, this guy's cool, and he's Australian.
He's got good shirts.
And we just started chatting, I guess. I can't remember how it actually happened. But I'm really grateful to have you in my life. You were a source of light and positivity and inspiration, and we certainly need more of that now more than ever, man. So I'm at your service, and if there's anything I can do to support you, man, I'm here for you.
Just be a friend, bro. I really appreciate it, man. And it works both ways.
Peace.
Thanks, man. Thanks for being part.
Yeah. Keep rocking, dude.
Thanks, dude.